Hello, I'm Rachel Mann PhD, sacred activist for peacemaking and ending violence, and healer, as well as social scientist. As we face the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it has conjured up for me all the many, many years that I studied the former Soviet Union, and where I actually was engaged in research on and reflection about how dictatorship, authoritarianism affects individuals, communities, groups, nations, and the world, and how people survive it, and not just that, heal from it, the tools and methods that they use. So I know that everybody around the world is shocked and horrified about what is happening in Ukraine, including millions of Russians. I have had in my life many friends from Russia, and I know for a fact that they would not support this war. And of course, we're seeing so many in Russia protesting this incursion into Ukraine, despite the fact that they know the reprisals and repercussions could be quite harsh. One of the questions that I asked, because I started studying Russia and the former Soviet Union literally when I was 15 years old. I decided to read a book off of a social studies class book list called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which was by the very acclaimed Russian writer in exile, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And somehow the story of that man who was surviving in a Soviet concentration camp, which was a thinly veiled, actually, autobiographical story by Solzhenitsyn about what was done to him by Stalin. And somehow in that moment, I was just galvanized. And of course, as a child born in 1961, the Cold War overshadowed my entire life. The looming fear of nuclear annihilation, the looming fear of world war, the looming fear of what the Soviet Union and its autocratic, authoritarian, really narcissistic leaders might do. Now, please don't get me wrong. I do understand that my nation, where I grew up, the United States, has had its own heavy hand around the world and caused much violence and suffering and harm. But to go back to the fact that I grew up under the shadow of the Cold War, and when I really began to be interested in Russian, studying the Russian language, studying the Soviet Union, the politics, the international affairs, the religion, the culture, and even in graduate school, I took a course on Soviet armaments. Can you believe it? I mean, I look back at that and I think how crazy that was. And always in my heart, I had this feeling, I somehow had this understanding from the time I was a 15, 16-year-old through the end when I completed my PhD in Slavic languages and literatures with an emphasis in Russian, and before that an MA in Soviet studies. I had a very clear feeling that I was holding a space as a light worker to end the Cold War, to end the threat of nuclear annihilation. I firmly believed that by understanding the so-called enemy, and seeing them in their humanity, and of course seeing that the majority, the large majority of the Russian population wanted peace just like I did, and that they too were suffering from what their leaders were doing. I somehow believed that I was simply holding a space so that war would be averted, and so that the will to imperialism would be ended. And not just the will to imperialism of the former Soviet Union, but the will to imperialism around the world. Not long before the end of the Cold War, I actually got a job being an interpreter-translator for the Soviet American Youth Orchestra. This was actually part of a government program, a cross-governmental program of cultural exchanges through the USIA. And so indeed, every year, young people from both the Soviet Union as well as the United States would audition to become a part of this summer program, where they would come together in a single location. In this case, when I was working for it, it was in the United States. To be honest, it's been so long ago, I don't even remember exactly where we gathered together. And then over a period of 6 weeks, all of these young musicians and the adults who were the conductors, the directors, and so on, came together to create a beautiful performance, a symphony, an orchestral performance, that then tickets would be sold and people would come from all over in order to watch these so-called enemies create beauty, create art. I understood, as I made friendships and relationships with people during that summer, with Russians and with other people from the republics of the Soviet Union, I understood how important this kind of gathering was. I knew that it was building the fires of peace, that it was dismantling distrust. Because when you live under a condition where both sides are saying that the others, that Russians want to attack the United States, or vice versa, that fear infiltrates our minds, that infiltrates our feelings, our hearts, and that it is so important for people to gather to do something creative and fruitful that creates joy, that creates pleasure, because pleasure and joy are the antithesis of fear, are the antithesis of violence. And sure enough, eventually, there was some sort of shift in the tide. And this man named Gorbachev came to the fore, and he seemed to hold a different vision for the future of Russia, of the Soviet Union. He somehow rose up in those ranks and had a vision of peace, a very different vision than any of his predecessors. And so finally, the Cold War came to an end. And I knew at that time that what I had done by being a light worker among the ranks of the many academics and the artists and the musicians, all the many people who'd been making these efforts to end the war of the minds, the war of threats, the war of fear, that somehow we had made a difference. And interestingly enough, when I finished my PhD in 1991, right as the Cold War ended, my interests moved into other directions. It was almost as if that was what that I had signed up to do on a soul level, was just to be one of hundreds of thousands of people who would hold this space of light, this space of love, this space of really healing. And now with Putin forcing his people into the invasion of a sovereign nation, the sovereign nation of Ukraine, here we are again. The Cold War may have ended, but there was also still the wounds of that ending. There were also still unhealed wounds in the leaders of Russia, unhealed wounds within us, just as there have been unhealed wounds from the prior world wars, unhealed wounds from wars around the world in the 20th century, the 21st century in Afghanistan. Here we are again. We are being given an opportunity to understand that war only brings hurt and harm, grief, loss, pain, and trauma. We are here once again to be reminded that it is not for any one of us, on a personal level, a family level, a community level, a level of nations, a level of tribes, to take over someone else's land, rights, freedoms, sovereignty. We must build a space of communion, friendship, respect, caring, kindness, and compassion. Let us hold that space together for Ukrainians, for the Russians who do not want this war, and for even those who are the initiators of the war, for they too need our love, they need our healing. All of us need peace. All of us need healing in this time. So let us be the light workers and activate the vibrational frequencies of peace within ourselves, and in so doing, hold that flame of peace alive, even as humanity once again forgets, parts of humanity once again forget. I send you so much love and gratitude for watching. May it be so.